Hello, I'm Regina McCann-Hess, president of Forge Wealth Management, and welcome to our Women in Wealth series. Today, I have a new friend with me, and this is going to be a real fun conversation. Eileen, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and what you love about what you do?
Sure. I'm Eileen Dawson. I'm up in Massachusetts, and I am a money coach. And I deal with people. It could be individuals, it could be couples, groups, and I help people get out of debt mostly and save a little bit of an emergency fund, and then pass them off to you once we get them in a good place. So what I love about it is it's teaching. And when I go to bed on Sunday night, I know when I wake up on Monday morning, I'm going to make a difference in people's lives. And so that's extremely rewarding to me.
That's music to my ears, because one of my things that I constantly talk to people about, and on my educational videos, I talk about that, like how harmful debt can be, not just in the short term, but in the long term. Like, people have no idea how it cripples you for your long-term planning. And just by making some basic changes in your day-to-day life, it can have a huge positive impact on your short-term and, most importantly, your long-term impact. So phenomenal service that you're offering. Really excited that you're here. I know I also talk to people about credit card debt and student loan debt. So tell me a little bit about how you help those people.
Okay, well, yeah, you're right. And usually it's credit cards, it's student loans, and vehicle loans. That's the majority of the weeds that I swim in with people. So typically what I do is I'll do a free consult, and I'll really get kind of an idea of what someone's financial picture looks like. What's the income, what's the outgo, and then as I start talking with people, we start off slow. Like a diet. You don't want to all of a sudden say, I'm going to lose 30 pounds in a month, because good luck to anybody that can do that. I've never
Yeah,
been successful at that.
not going to happen.
So, right. So we start off, we get a little bit of money in the bank, just so if they have a dishwasher that breaks or they need a car payment or something, they've got cash instead of throwing it on a credit card. And then we start working on the debts. That's where I mostly am with people, is, working on all those debts and being able to put a plan together. Because usually people have money in their budget, but because they haven't really paid attention to where the money's flowing, they don't understand why there's debt. An example I have is my son 2 months ago. He doesn't like me telling the story, but he racked up $572 on his debit card with McDonald's, with Dunkin' Donuts, with Chick-fil-A, all this stuff that was just food that was, fleeting. And I'm like, bud, you only make like $800 a month and you just spent almost 600. Did you realize that was happening? And by the way, you had to work 45 hours for free that month. And that's what really got him, because that's a lot of time. And he's in school, he's in college, he just started. And so, I'm like, you got to pay attention to what's happening. You got to look and see, where are the leaks? Everybody's got leaks. And, to be able to channel some of that into debt, you can really, like, someone doesn't have to have a 20-year student loan. When I was going to school, it was 10. That was the max.
Right.
And so don't take it out unless you could pay it back in 10 years.
Right.
So now they have 20, they're trying to push 30. And it's like that's a house that, really, needs the 25 or 30 year,
Yeah.
mortgage. So it's definitely a place. I'd say about 75 to 80% of people have debt that's outside of their home.
Mm.
So to try to get that down and put them in a better place, so that then I can pass them to you and they can really start, putting that retirement money in, or, 529s if they have kids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I love the conversation about the student loan, where you're saying they're allowing
mhm,
these kids to pay it over longer periods of time. And that's so detrimental to them. I actually
mhm,
know a girl who, she's not a girl, she's a woman, but she graduated from college and went in, did her job. And she, a couple years later, she tried to buy a house and could not buy a house because the amount of student loan payments
mhm,
equaled or exceeded what her mortgage payment would be, and it
mhm.
exceeded the debt ratio. And it was just like, oh my God, didn't
Yeah.
anybody talk to you about like paying that off and chunking it down a
Yeah.
little lower time frame? And nobody had. And I was just like, okay, we need to talk.
Mhm.
And I was helping one of my clients' children, like their adult children, and we were like just talking about her student loan debt. Now she's in grad school, so she's still in school, but we're getting ahead of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
so that when she graduates she has a better idea. So we had to call one of the student loan servicing agencies, because the statements weren't very clear about, what was going on in that statement. And when we called, I asked a bunch of questions, and I was just like, okay, well, when she's done school, what's the time frame that you guys
Mm-hmm.
offer for her to pay this off? And they said 15 years. And I'm like, oh my God, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no.
Yeah.
you know
Well, it's funny because I know several people that are in their 40s that have kids that are small and they're still paying their student loans. So how are they going to help those kids? And if you're in your early 40s and you haven't really started putting anything into retirement, you're going to have to do some serious catch up.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have, the average vehicle loan is $500 to $550 a month.
Hmm.
Well, if you look at that over the course of the 3 to 4 years, whether it's a lease or, the car payments now are like 5, 6, even more years. Your
Oh yeah.
car's already a piece of junk by the time you're paying off the loans. So yeah, it is. And unfortunately, companies will lend that money. My son graduated with a guy that had a full boat to University of Massachusetts in the Eisenberg School of Management. And he decided, I'm going to go to UCLA for $60,000 a year because I kind of want to just get away from my family for a little while. So he's going to have $240,000 when he gets out. And he's an economics major. So it's not like he's a law student or a doctor where he's going to be able to, tackle those loans faster. And so I think I'm like, I wish I could have got you before you before you
Yeah.
made that decision, because it
Right.
is going to affect him for 10, 20, 30 years.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So that's a big problem across America. I mean, it
Hmm.
is touching almost every family, and it's a constant conversation just about managing the debt. When they're coming out of school, don't just listen to the loan servicing company saying, here's your payment for the next 15 years. Talk to somebody like you about, like, let's create a different time frame for paying this off.
Hmm.
Yes, we'll have to pay more every month, but you're used to being a starving college student. Stay kind of in that mode for a little
Yeah.
while. Get this taken care of.
Well, and a lot of kids actually are paying their interest while they're in school. My daughter is going to be getting out in nursing school in the spring, and she feels guilty because all of her friends are working just to pay their interest on the student loans that will that will be due 6 months after they graduate, whether you have a job or not.
Yeah.
And so it really is. The kids are stressed out in college too, because it's not like if they make $100 or $200 a month that they get to, pay for books or pizza or whatever. It's going towards just the interest.
Yeah.
And of course they're getting stressed out. They're just seeing it grow, grow, grow. And so, yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Now let's pivot to the credit card debt a little bit, because that's self-made.
Yes,
And hey, every single one of us has been there. I've been there. You just
absolutely.
you're going through a time. You're like, all right, I'll catch up. I'll catch up with it next month, and then it's a couple months. It's a couple months. But sometimes I find that people use their credit cards to subsidize their standard of living and wind
Hmm.
up they're spending more than they're bringing in. So
That's correct.
tell me a little bit about your experiences with that.
Well, it's funny because credit cards can range anywhere from like 16% up. Someone might be lucky and get a 12% rate, but that's still a lot of money. Can you
Yeah.
imagine if every single year you got a 16% return on your retirement?
Yeah.
You'd have a
That'd be
lot of
nice.
money. It'd be nice, but I don't know that that's typically what we get long term.
No, we don't.
But yeah, the credit cards, they just keep building. And if they do the little, the minimum payment is going to take off like 1,000 years to pay it off.
Yeah.
And it just keeps building. So some credit cards are 22, 25%, which
Hmm.
is crazy. That's, for every $1,000 they have, that's another $250. And most people don't have $1,000 on their credit cards. They have anywhere from 5 to 20 on average. So yeah, they're not getting ahead unless they really start to do some serious, adding to it every month.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And then yeah, so that's another thing that I think you would work very well with people who have that issue, and creating a plan to get them out of
Hmm.
that, and then changing their habits. And that's the other
Hmm.
big thing, changing their
That's
habits and
huge.
creating better long-term habits. So
Hmm.
fantastic.
Yeah, I
Um,
can't want it for someone more than they do. It's
True.
like I may want my husband to help me to, like, can you take my, 20 pounds of COVID off? And it's like, that's an inside job. He can encourage me and say, hey, listen, how about we have some fruit tonight instead of the cheesecake? But he can't make me lose weight. That's ultimately going to be on me. And so when I coach people, I make suggestions and I walk alongside them because debt's really scary to a lot of people. And they just
Yeah.
want to put their head in the sand because they're overwhelmed with it.
Right. And that's a
So,
very good point. They're overwhelmed, embarrassed, and it's kind of like they can't talk about it because they're embarrassed, but
mhm.
they, at the same token, if they don't talk about it, they don't, they don't get the help they need to get out of that situation.
Right. And a lot of couples, fight and divorce because of money. I
Mhm.
can remember when my husband and I first got married, we worked with couples for about 10 years that they were engaged and they were learning communication skills and that kind of thing. And when we would get feedback at the end of the weekend, I'd say at least 70% of them would say, why don't you talk about money? Why don't you talk about how we could get along with money and be able to put a plan together? And of course, we had this little book and a bibliography, which I'm sure nobody ever read. But that really impacted us, long term. Little did I know that I would end up working as a money coach. But, that information was really important even, back before people had as much debt as they do now.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you, find out, how they could work with you, find out a little bit more about your services, how would they find you?
That's a good question. Like if you do a Google search, I don't think a lot of people are saying, hey, you know what? I need a debt management coach. I'm going to put up the word money coach and see what comes up. And if I put financial coach up, then people think I do what you do with the retirement. And so that's why I changed it to money, because nobody's a money coach that's in financial planning with,
Okay.
all
Yep.
the certifications. So yeah, it's a good question. I think, the way I build it mostly is one-on-one.
Okay.
If I splash an ad on Facebook, people don't know who I am. And they're like, oh, she's going to be, going and rummaging through my bureau of money. And, why would I trust her unless somebody has made a referral that's, had some success? So what I usually do is I usually, talk with them for an hour and a half. We talk about the budget. We talk about their pain points, what keeps them up at night. And then from there, we put a plan together. And typically I work with people somewhere between 3 to 6 months to be able to change those habits. But some people are really fast and they're like, I get it. And it's just 1 month. And then maybe just a little bit of refresh over the course. I'm available to them, longer term. And if they have questions or they need a little bit of advice, sometimes it's just a little tweak and they don't really need, me long term. So,
Right. Right. Okay. 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 So they Google money coach and they
hmm
would be able to find you. Okay.
hmm
All right. All right.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you have a website or do they
I
come
do.
up with a phone? What's your website address?
It's Dawson Services at GoDaddySites.com.
Okay.
And it really is, I just learned recently, not being a tech person, that that's a landing page. But I like that because based on my history as a human resource person and looking at, thousands of resumes, you've got about 4 to 7 seconds to catch someone's attention, or else they're off and running and they're not even looking at your stuff. So
Right.
somebody can actually whip through my site over the course of, 10, 12 seconds and kind of understand what I do.
Right. 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 Okay, cool. 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 Now I'm going to shift gears on you because we both have been professional women for many years. And
hmm
I want to ask you, what are some of the challenges that you have faced as a professional woman?
Mm. That's a good question. Well, I think most recently I was for 7 years a technical recruiter. So I was hiring software engineers, I was hiring, website, designers, uh, data warehouse people, which is
Mhm.
real. There's never enough people for the jobs. So I'd say some of the frustration I had would be I couldn't find the people, or the person's worth 110,000 and they give me a salary range up to 80. And
Mm.
so how do you get that kind of professional? And the managers wanted it yesterday,
Yeah.
yeah, I need that yesterday. So that's been one of the challenges. And I'd say when I was a human resource manager, I was on track. I had gotten a master's degree in HR and I was going to be a manager and then a director and a VP. But what I saw was that those supervisors of mine were working 80 hours a week, Sunday night at 11 o'clock every weekend. They were, doing emails. And I thought, well, I wanted a family. So I wanted something that wasn't going to own me and where my kids could be priority. And then my, occupation was be secondary. So that's how I really got into the recruiting side, which I had done from the very beginning as an HR manager. That was one of the heaviest parts of my position. But what I loved was employee relations. I came from a social service background. I taught people jobs and, all the people that they worked with to teach them how to work with, somebody that had delay or, mental health issues. So I loved that. But I was going to make $8 an hour for like the rest of my life or the
Yeah.
equivalent of it. So I thought, well, that long term isn't going to necessarily get me where I need to go financially. So that's when I went into HR to help people in a company. So
That's
kind of my history.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Now, looking ahead, what's your retirement vision? How do you envision your retirement?
That's a good question. My husband and I just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary this summer, and we went up to Maine on the coast and we talked about it. And, we definitely want something that we're going to do. I can do this, for a long time. And there's not age discrimination because with what you and I do, sometimes the more experience you have, the more people value it.
Yes.
So it's, that's one of the things. So I probably will continue it. The question is just going to be how much, do I do? And I can totally control my schedule like I can now. So yeah, I think I'll still be continuing, volunteer. I just don't see myself watching Jerry Springer, every day on TV in a rocket chair. So, yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, I think there's lots of options.
Yeah. And it's great that you're having the conversation with your husband. Congratulations on your anniversary, by the way. That's
Thank you.
exciting. But sometimes spouses have different visions of retirement. One may want to travel, one may just want to stay home, but just go to all the local golf courses or something like that. But sometimes, spouses or partners have two totally different visions and they have to find a way to merge it. So it's great that you're having that conversation now, because sometimes people come to me for retirement planning, looking to retire in the near future. And I ask them that question. They're both like, oh, well,
Right.
it's a different conversation.
Right. And if they have $50,000 in retirement, unless they really don't need much, that's not going to necessarily bring, the dreams that they, had of maintaining, the type of income they have now.
True.
And so my husband's not the money nerd I am. He's the visionary, he's the dreamer that, wants the big house. And he also wants to travel to Italy and all these other places. And I said, hey, bud, you know what? You can't have both, because if we're going to have a big house, then we're going to kind of stick around that. So I'd rather have a conservative house and the ability to get on a plane. If my 15-year-old continues her dream now and becomes a pilot, we're going to be very excited about that, because it will open up lots of travel.
Yes, it will.
Options. So hopefully we'll, be healthy enough and everything to be able to, to go around the country and international.
Yeah.
So
Get on that friends and family plan from the airlines.
yes.
Good deal.
It sounds good to me.
Yeah. Exciting. Well, good luck. Good luck with that. Keep having those conversations, because that's, half the fun, envisioning it. And I want to thank you for being here today. This was a great conversation. And I'm so glad you're doing what you do, because so many people need your help. So that's a great service that you're offering.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Anytime. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us too. Without you, we have no show. So thank you very much. Again, I'm Regina McCann-Hess, president of Forge Wealth Management. You can find me at forgewealth.com, and I'm on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Forge Wealth, and LinkedIn, Regina McCann-Hess. Have a great day.